Well, good morning, church family. So great again to have you guys in the room. And for those of you joining us online, welcome to Cedarcrest Church. My name is Van, and I'm the senior pastor here, but you're not going to hear from this Vandegriff today. You're actually going to hear from another Vandegriff. This is my wife, Kelly. I'd love to introduce you to her. Many of you know who she is. You've dropped your kids off back in our kids ministry. She's one of our kids directors and is normally back there on Sundays. And so you've been able to meet her if you have a little kiddo in our church. But in the busiest week of the year for our kids team, I said, hey, Kelly, would you also bring a word on Sunday morning in the big house for us? And I'm pretty sure I've been sleeping on the couch ever since I made that invitation. But just kidding. Kelly's actually been amazing to say yes to speak today. Even before I got in at 4 a.m. this morning, we thought about this weeks ago. Knew we were going to be doing this series, The Family Likeness. And so you're hearing from different family members in our own household this week. But also we've been in the book of Ruth. And so last week I was able to share a little bit out of the life of Boaz. And today we're going to hear a little bit out of the life of Ruth. And I thought no one better qualified to speak from a woman's perspective about the life of Ruth than my wife. And here's why I would say that. I want to make sure I qualify this, not just because she's my wife, but because I do live in the same household as her. And I see her character, and I see her grace and forgiveness towards me. I'm one of the biggest knuckleheads you'll ever meet, and she puts up with me. I see the way that she is a great mom to our kiddos and how she loves you and how she prays for you. And because of all of those things done in the private place and the hidden place with Jesus, it's my honor to be able to invite you, babe, to share the word of God with us this morning. Would you give her a warm welcome, Cedarcrest Church? Love you.
He doesn't tell me what he's going to say exactly. He's like, I'll get up there and I'll introduce you, but I didn't know it was going to be like encouraging. Thanks, babe. I'm so excited to be with you in this capacity this morning. As Van said, I'm normally back there, so I actually don't see a lot of your faces. You probably wonder if I even come to church on a Sunday morning. Don't worry, I do. I'm just with your kids, and I love it back there. I love the next generation so much. We love the next generation as Cedarcrest Church. I also just want you to know, even if I don't see you every Sunday, I love my church, and you are my church. So this is such a joy for me and an honor to be with you this morning. And I'm super excited to continue talking about the story of Ruth. I'm excited to tell her story. Last week, Van talked about Boaz, but this week, we're going to talk about the family likeness, the character of God that we see exemplified in the person of Ruth, the woman of God, Ruth. But before we do, let's just talk basic family likeness. Because I do work with a lot of your kids, I can walk by a room, and if I haven't seen your kid in a while, I can look at a kid. I'm looking at the Chapmans right now, and I can be like, oh, he's a Chapman. Like, I just can see family likeness. So I thought, well, why don't we throw up some pictures of family likeness? So I think I typed in find freakishly similar family likeness into Google, which, by the way, just don't ever search Google. There's crazy stuff. But I found some pictures, and I want to show you what I found, just because isn't it fun to show people what you find on the internet? Okay, so I found some pictures. Okay, that is a mother and daughter twinsies, family likeness. I know you guys have these in your family, so you're like, yes, of course. Okay, next, we'll see the next one. Father, son. Yep, you think it's the same person. It's not. They're related, though, obviously. Okay, who's next? Yes, this is a mother and daughter. It's so sweet. Oh, I didn't realize it said mother and daughter on there. Cute. That's helpful. And finally, who else do we have? Oh, they're the same, but they're not. This is family likeness. We even have some people on our staff that I was like, if you guys have a twinsy photo of you and your kid, show me. So I got sent this picture by Kristen and Daniel Baldus. Y'all, that's Daniel and that's Gracie. Look at their nose and their eyes. They're twins. This is family likeness. And finally, last but not least, now if Derek were to take off his glasses, maybe go like that just a little, and put on a wig, I'm telling you, they're twins. So this, sorry, if I did, I would, anyway. They're twins, they really are. Anyway, it's a fun way to look at family likeness. But today, we're talking about what it looks like to be in the family of God. And I'm so, like I've said, I'm so excited to to look at the story of Ruth. So my big question for this morning, and kids, we always have a big idea, a bottom line, a big question that we're asking that we want to leave the morning with. So here's this morning's big question as we look at the life and story of Ruth. For those of us who follow Jesus, for those of us who have said, yes, we want to be in the family of God, is it obvious to others that we're a part of God's family? If we were to look at Jesus and our lives be put up right next to his, would people say, oh, I see the family resemblance? So everything that we say, everything I say this morning, that's the big question that I want us to answer for ourselves. So Holy Spirit, help us, because the worship this morning was amazing, y'all, and just the character of God that is echoed throughout those songs. I'm like, I want to be like him. So I think we're going to leave the story of Ruth wanting to look more like Jesus. So let's jump in. So grab your Bibles or your phones or look at the screen. We have options here, people. But we are going to be in the first chapter of Ruth. Specifically, I want to look at 3 passages which I feel like really highlight the character of God that Ruth displays. And the first one happens in the first chapter, but I kind of want to give you some background before we get to these verses, just to understand what's been happening in the book of Ruth. There are 3 main people in this book. You met Boaz last week if you were here. If you weren't here, I would strongly encourage you to listen to that message. It was really good, babe. It was very good, seeing the character of God displayed through Boaz. So we've got 3 people, Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth. And obviously we're focusing on Ruth, but Naomi is a huge part of her story. So let me just give you the background of where it leads us to our first passage. So Naomi, before Ruth was a thing in her family, Naomi and her husband and 2 sons lived in Bethlehem. There was a terrible famine, so they moved to the country of Moab. While there, Naomi's husband dies, which is very sad, but she has 2 sons, and the 2 sons marry. So now Naomi has 2 daughters-in-laws and her sons, so she still has family in the country of Moab. The daughter-in-laws are Ruth and Orpah, which I always want to say Oprah or Orca, but it's Orpah, okay? Just hang with me. Okay, so Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. Now, Ruth and Orpah were from the country of Moab. So they're Moabite women. They are not Israelites. So they married into the Israelite family. So 10 years after they married into the family, both sons die. So now we've got Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah with no males in their family, which is incredibly problematic at this point in history. Women needed a man in their life, an uncle, grandfather, father, cousin, any male in their life to provide for them. They were not even permitted to be self-sufficient. They were viewed more like property. So this is obviously a problem if Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah are now on their own with no men in their lives to help take care of them. And that's where we are in the story. Naomi is urging her daughters-in-law to go back to their families in Moab, which was also very customary. If men die and she has no other son to offer either one of these ladies, then she encourages them to go back to their family to be taken care of by their father, cousin, uncle, whoever would take them on. So that's where we are in the point of the story where I want to read this first passage. It's in Ruth 1. We start reading in verse 14 through the first part of 19. So Orpah has said, I will go back to my family. So we begin in verse 14. At this, they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. powerful statement that Ruth makes to her mother-in-law, Naomi. There's so much I could pull out of that, but what I see when I read that, what I feel, what I see in the character of God being displayed in Ruth in this moment is sacrifice. Ruth had every right. She had the right to be released from her mother-in-law and go back to a family that could provide for her. And honestly, Naomi expected her to do that. Naomi was not expecting Ruth to stay with her and go with her back to her family. But instead, Ruth makes this statement that I don't think she makes flippantly. There was some major commitment. That's major commitment. When you say, where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried, which makes sense because you are buried where you die usually. But anyway, I'm glad she said that part, just in case it wasn't clear. Anyway, true sacrifice costs something. Think about it. Sacrifice costs. It's not really a sacrifice if it doesn't cost us. But so often we think we're sacrificing, but it's actually not really costing us anything. But Ruth was rejecting what was rightfully hers. It was certain provision in her family at home. It was another husband that probably would have been given to her by her family. It was children, which is what would have sustained her in her older life. She was saying no to those things to stick with Naomi, to be close to her. She sacrificed what was known for an unknown people, an unknown land, and actually an unknown future. There was no promise here that Naomi could give her provision, a husband, sons. There was none of that. So this commitment to Naomi cost Ruth a lot. And sacrifice, it's not really a fun thing to talk about in the suburbs, I don't think so much. So I kind of was just reflecting like, okay, so what am I sacrificing? What is it that when I give it, it costs me? Because I think that's how we need to think about sacrifice in the suburban setting. And for this season of my life, I have a lot going on. I mean, Van just said kids camps this week, so there's a lot going on. So I feel it when I sacrifice my time to give undivided attention to my kids. It costs me emotional energy. I feel it when I prioritize Van. I mean, I love you, but you're welcome. But I feel it. It costs me something. It costs me time that I could be doing something else. So there's a cost to sacrifice. In other season, it's been money. I have felt like the Lord's been leading. We have given a lot over the years just because we feel like we're called to do that. And it's not really a sacrifice unless you feel it. So we were saving for a car. We actually gave away a portion of our money to somebody else who needed a car. We felt that. And that's not to say, oh, way to go, Kelly. It's to say, it costs us something. Sacrifice costs. So my question for you is, what does it look like in your life to exemplify this piece of who God is? Where is it costing you something when you give to somebody else? Now, Naomi wasn't just giving to the entire town or country of Moab. She actually committed to a person. And we'll get more into that in a minute. So I'm not saying just sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. We'll talk about your people in a minute. I'll get there in a minute. But what we know as Jesus followers is when we lay our life down, we get to see Jesus meet a need in us that wouldn't otherwise be met if we hadn't been willing to lose something. We really gain him when we sacrifice. And living for other people is way better. I know you guys know this. In fact, I know a lot of you know this because a lot of you are volunteering at kids camp this week. Whoop, whoop. Thank you. That's huge. Because so many of you have full-time jobs. So many of you are with kids all day. And yet you're coming up here from 5 to 8:45. Lord willing, get out of here by 8:45. every night this week. And for those of you who couldn't sign up for kids camp, don't worry. We have a chance for you to volunteer on Friday night, just in case you missed that in the bump. Nope, the Sunday update. So listen, this is a place where we want to live our lives for one another. So thank you for those of you who are going to be at kids camp this week. We really, honestly, we can't do this without you. And our community, our kids, they need Jesus-loving people emulating this type of character to them. So thank you for being a part of that. So at the very end of that passage, we see that the two went on to Bethlehem. So they're returning to Naomi's hometown. They arrive at the perfect time. It just happens to be the barley harvest, and I know Van talked a lot about this last week. They had the opportunity to immediately jump in and start gathering grain, which was provision for them. They did not have any sort of provision. Remember, no mail. They didn't know who in Bethlehem would take them on. So they arrive in time for barley harvest, and Ruth immediately asks Naomi, "Can I go and gather barley behind the servants of one of the field owners?" And she's like, "Yes, go gather." So of course she's gathering barley behind the servants, so picking up all the leftovers. So this is not a glorious job, right? But she is committed. She's made the sacrifice to stay with Naomi. So she is committed to providing for her and for winning favor with whoever owns the field, which she does, because guess who owns the field? Boaz. Hey, good job. You were listening last week. Sammy, well done. Boaz owns the field, and Boaz happens to be a distant relative of Naomi's husband. Boaz invites Ruth. Remember the word that Van used for this? He initiated with Ruth that she could remain and gather in his field. There was favor that he extended to her. And then he further commits to protect her, that nobody would harm her while she's gathering the extras. Well, Ruth is very surprised by Boaz's generosity and favor that he gives her. So let's jump into the next passage where we see Ruth's character on display. This is in Ruth 2, verses 10 through 12. At this, Ruth bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done." What I see Boaz recognizing in Ruth is faithfulness. So we've seen her sacrifice. She's left what she's known for the unknown. And Boaz is basically catching her in the act of being faithful to do what she said she's going to do. She was committed to Naomi, not just in being present with her and getting her to Bethlehem, but she now is gathering food for them, winning favor with the townspeople. She is also referred to in chapter 3 as a woman of excellence. She was establishing a reputation. There was something different about Ruth. She was operating from a different spirit, and Boaz recognized her faithfulness to Naomi. Listen, it's hard to be faithful to people, especially if the circumstance or that person changes. And this is when Boaz recognizes Ruth, her faithfulness to Naomi. But I saw it when Naomi actually entered Bethlehem. And Naomi, a few women were recognizing Naomi, and they were saying, "Isn't that Naomi, the one who went to Moab, and she's back?" And Naomi heard them, and she said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore." Naomi means sweetness. Her name means sweetness. She said, "Don't call me that anymore. Call me Mara," which means bitter, for the Lord's hand has been against me. So Naomi, she had experienced so much loss. Her husband, her sons, she's back in town, and she's like, "I am not the same person." I have the sweetest mother-in-law on the planet. I'm trying to imagine what I would do if she was like, don't call me Patsy, call me bitter. I'd be like, what would we do? You're like, where's the eject button? I'm out. I know you guys have seen the new Top Gun movie. You're like, eject, eject. It's not opening. But she doesn't eject. She doesn't say, I'm sorry. I have to draw a boundary line here. This is not what I signed up for. Boundaries are good. I'm not saying boundaries are not good. But Ruth's faithfulness was not determined by Naomi's state of mind or the state of her heart. She was just faithful because that's the character of God. And we're going to discover in a minute, she knew who God was. And she was not going to abandon Naomi, who she committed to, just because Naomi was having a really hard time. Y'all, that's hard for us in 2022. I mean, we just came out of a pandemic where we were able to selectively be with people all we wanted in the name of don't get me sick. Right? It's like, oh, you're coughing. I'm not coming to your house. So here's the thing. Who are your people? Who has God called you to? Because God has called all of us to commit to people. He's designed us for himself first and foremost, and then he's made us to connect and be faithful to each other as brothers and sisters in the Lord. This is what we're created for. So who are your people in this season? And where's your level of faithfulness with these people? This is what I have to evaluate. I'm like, I know my people. Van's my people. My kids are my people. I've got a discipleship group. They're my people. I've got friends, they're my people. I know who my people are. But where is my level of faithfulness with my people? So that's kind of what I want us to ask ourselves this morning. Where are you with your friend that's really struggling with mental health? Are you being faithful to that friend? What about your teenage kid that is giving you so much attitude and maybe even said, I hate you at one point? Where's your level of faithfulness with them? Are you able to step into the character of God in those situations and exemplify who he is? Show your kids the family likeness? Show your roommate that even no matter how many times you have asked them to clean the dishes in the sink, they just won't do it. And you just decide, it's okay. They're busy. I'm gonna just do the dishes again. So where is God calling you to be faithful? Who is he calling you to be faithful to? And where's your level of faithfulness with them? And you know what faithfulness requires? Sacrifice. Like these three things that I see in Ruth, they're all connected. The faithfulness requires sacrifice because we have to often disregard our feelings to continue to press in and be faithful to who God's called us to be faithful to. And we see Ruth doing this. And God does this with us. I can't say I always have the best attitude with him. If he asks me to do something and I don't like it, sometimes I say, I'll pray about that, God of the universe. But he's patient with us. He's faithful to us, even if we're not faithful to him. Hey, quick side note. As I was talking about Naomi, as I was preparing and praying for this, I just felt like bitterness is something that definitely drives a wedge between you and God and you and other people. And I just want to submit to you today, if that is something that you're dealing with, if you're dealing with just the offense that you can't let go of, and it may not be a major one. It may not be you lost your husband and your 2 sons within a time period and you're mad at God about it. It may not be that size of a thing. It could be that your coworker constantly is saying falsehoods, which puts you in a weird spot because you're trying to go for the same promotion as them and they're kissing up and you are just trying to do the right thing. But you're replaying it in your head over and over and over again. When we rehearse our hurt, that's when it takes a bitter root in our hearts. So if you're rehearsing, there's freedom to be had this morning. God is here and he wants to release you from it, but we just have to offer it to him. We'll pray for you later. We are going to be praying today, but that's just what I felt like the Lord wanted to say about bitterness. All right, so Boaz has recognized Ruth. We recognize her faithfulness. And at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi's like, okay, Ruth, it's time. It's time to throw yourself at the mercy of Boaz and ask him to redeem us as a family, which basically means to take on all their property as well as them and care for them, provide for them, protect them. So Ruth was like, what should I do? And Naomi gives very specific instructions. And in verse 5 of chapter 3, after some very specific instructions, this is what Ruth says to Naomi. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. I will do whatever you say. Now, what I see in this it's not even a passage. What I see in this sentence is trust, vulnerability. There's a willingness here to risk that I see Ruth walking in. And this is hard for our modern ears to hear in the right context. I will do whatever you say. When's the last time you guys said that to somebody? I mean, for real. That's not a phrase that we just throw out there. Usually we're like, oh, I need to vet that person's advice, or, oh, I'm not sure about this. But here's the context of this. Ruth and Naomi have history. They have a depth of relationship. Even when Ruth declared her commitment to Naomi, Ruth says, your people will be my people, your God, my God. Ruth had rejected the gods of her countrymen for the God of Naomi. I think Ruth trusted Naomi. I think Ruth trusted that Naomi was following God. But ultimately, Ruth trusted God. She professed her faith in God, the God of Israel, Naomi's God. So what enables Ruth to say this isn't her trust solely in Naomi. It's her trust in God. And actually, Boaz recognizes this as well. If we go back to the 12th verse of chapter 2, it just says, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord. This is Boaz speaking. The God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Even Boaz recognized that Ruth was trusting in God. And this trust in God is what enabled her to sacrifice, not her love for Naomi, her trust that God was going to provide for them. It was her trust in God that allowed her to trust Naomi, even when it was hard, even when Naomi was bitter and had changed. It was trust in God that was fueling Ruth's faithfulness to her mother-in-law. So how do we operate in today's world? Do we trust people easily? Do we trust our family members like this? The people that we're committed to. Do we trust this way? I would argue no. We generally walk in a lot of self-protection. And self-protection looks like, I'm going to reject you before I get rejected. It looks like manipulation and control in the relationship. It's remaining on the surface of relationships that you know you're called to go deep with. Think life group, discipleship groups, even your own family. But extending trust, which is it's a character trait of God. We'll look at how Jesus did this in just a minute. But extending trust is believing the best, risking getting hurt, being honest, and leaning in. Are you living a life of self-protection with the ones that you're called to? So not everybody. Don't trust everybody. That is not what I'm saying. But the people you're called to walk with and do life with, are you trusting them? Are you trusting God that when they don't meet your needs, that he will? Listen, people are going to let us down, but God will never let us down. He just won't. It's not in his character to let us down. And we may feel let down by God, but feelings aren't always truth. Feelings have a place, but they are not your plumb line. The nature of who God is, according to his word, is our plumb line. So we aren't going to read the end of the story this morning, but I kind of want to spoil it for you. And I would highly encourage you to read this story. It's only 4 chapters, the book of Ruth. Wonderful. But here's the end of the story. Boaz agrees willingly and excitedly, honestly, to take on Naomi and Ruth. They are provided for. Ruth and Boaz marry, and they become great-grandparents of a young man named David. King David. You probably have heard of him. And if you follow that genealogy to the first chapter of Matthew, you'll see that that is the genealogy of Jesus. So what we're looking at is not just a family likeness as in the character of who God is. We're like looking at his family, which is so cool to think about because they look like Jesus in a lot of ways. Speaking of Jesus, if we're ever confused, if he was willing to sacrifice, if he's faithful, if he ever had to extend trust, then let me just remind you, Jesus had every right to heaven. It was his home. He was equal with God. And in Philippians 2, it tells us that he willingly gave that up to come make a way for us to be with him forever. He sacrificed everything. And then when he was here, he sacrificed his own life for us. Jesus emulates sacrifice. And he is faithful. He's faithful to do what he said he would do. He's faithful to never leave us or forsake us. If you're in the family of God, you have the Spirit of God. He is always with you. He's faithful to us. And finally, we see Jesus emulating trust. Jesus modeling what trust looked like for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. Do you remember the prayer he prayed? God, not my will, which means that Jesus might have been thinking of another option. Like if you actually think about it, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus was trusting the heart of his Father, even though he knew what was coming. So Jesus shows us what trust looked like. I don't know if you remember a couple of weeks ago, it's been about a month now, but we sent a family out from this place. The Revis family, Jenny and Jason Revis, and just walking with them over the past couple years, I have seen sacrifice, faithfulness, and trust. Y'all, that family looks like Jesus. Jenny's sister was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease about a year ago. And they started praying, Lord, what are we to do? Are we to commit to caring for? Are we to commit to, what are we to do in this situation? So they literally felt like the Lord was leading, and obviously the foundation of sacrifice and faithfulness is ultimately trusting God. They decided to trust God in his leading of moving to Arizona to care for their family. Y'all, that is a sacrifice. That is a sacrifice to leave your kids' schools, your neighbors, your established life in a place. I know some of you have moved. I've moved. It's a sacrifice to move your family. But out of a call to be faithful, to care for her sister and her family, Jenny and Jason both said yes and amen, we're in. So they are there today They might be watching. Hi, Revises, I don't know. But they have emulated the family likeness. They have shown me tangibly, this is what sacrifice looks like today. And this is extreme sacrifice, but it's sacrifice. Faithfulness looks like being called to a people, and Jenny and Jason have beautifully always felt called to their family. So this was just the next level of faithfulness for them. And through it all, even when the decision was hard, even when they didn't know where the finances would come from to move, even when they were trusting God with their house sale, everything, their trust is what fueled the faithfulness and the sacrifice. They believe that God is going to show himself as faithful and true to them. And it's been beautiful watching that story up close and personal. The family likeness is clear when I look at that family. What would we say about you, me? Do we look like the family of God? Do we willingly sacrifice for the people we're called to? Are we walking faithfully alongside those that God's called us to walk alongside? Ultimately, are we trusting God to meet our every need? Because that's what the family of God looks like. That's the family likeness. And I want to be caught at every turn looking like Jesus. I don't know about you. This world needs us to look like Jesus. And this isn't a pressure point. We're all made. We are wired to connect with God. So even if you're not in the family of God yet this morning, you're made for him, and he's available to you. We're going to spend some time just praying, because it's really hard. It's hard to walk in the family likeness if you don't have a picture of what the family looks like. So this morning, I just want to have a time of prayer. Will you guys stand with me? Let's go ahead and stand. If our prayer team could come forward, that would be awesome. And life group leaders, if you'll just be on call. The world notices when we look different than them. So this morning, I just want to pray, if anything that has been said, if it's the bitterness piece, if it's the sacrifice piece, if you need to know God is faithful, if you need to be reacquainted with the goodness and kindness of who he is and his faithfulness this morning, come pray. We just want to pray for you. And it is not limited to anything that I've said. So if there is a need in your life this morning for more of God, if you need breakthrough in a job, with a kid, in your marriage, whatever you need, we want to cover it all this morning. So please come and be prayed for before you leave this place, because God's here. And he wants to meet with us and transform us so that we look like him. The world needs us to look like him because they need him. So let me pray, and then we're going to sing a song while we respond. Lord, thank you so much for the story of Ruth and how you beautifully were on display through the way she responded to her family, the way she sacrificed for Naomi. Father, the way that she was faithful to follow through on her word. Lord, thank you that that intimate trust that she had with you, God, we can have too. You're the same God. So Lord, I pray that as we respond to you this morning, Father, that you would just reveal to us again your nature. God, that we would learn again that you're faithful, true to your word, that you love us, that you initiate with us, that you protect us, that you transform us. Lord, may we meet you afresh this morning. Wake us up, God, where our hearts have gotten sleepy or tired in reflecting the family. Because Jesus, we want to look like you. We love you, God. We give you this time. In Jesus' name, amen.